Picture this. The year is 218 AD. Rome is a city of marble and blood, of temples and treachery. The sun glints off the Colosseum stones, casting long shadows into streets where senators whisper behind folded togas, and citizens gape at the passing procession of an emperor unlike any they have ever seen. At the heart of the city, in the imperial palace, a young boy stands before a gilded mirror, his reflection in impossible contradiction, a boy of 14 years, yet dressed in silken robes embroidered with gold and crimson, a wreath of flowers in his hair, the scent of exotic perfumes filling the air around him. This is Elagabalus, Emperor of Rome, a boy crowned with the world's power, yet living by his own rules. His life will be remembered not for conquests or legacies of war, but for defiance, extravagance, and the courage, or madness, to be unapologetically himself. The streets of Rome erupt with admiration, horror, and gossip. Senators mutter curses, priests clutch sacred idols, and the people gape in confusion and wonder. And yet, behind closed doors, behind the marble and the gold, Elagabalus experiences the only freedom he will ever know, the freedom to dress as he wishes, to move as he wishes, to exist as he truly is, a boy emperor who refuses to be a man the world demands he become. Even gods bow to secrets they cannot hide. The story that follows is not just one of scandal or excess. It is a story of identity, of rebellion, of tragedy. And it begins far away from Rome, in a small city of Emesa, under the shadows of the Syrian sun, where a boy was born who would one day challenge an empire itself. From the quiet city of Emesa to the blazing courts of Rome, Elagabalus's journey is a path of paradox, divine power intertwined with personal desire, a boy emperor in a world that would never understand him. Elagabalus was born in 203 AD, in Emesa, a city perched on the edge of the Syrian desert, where the sun burned red against stone and sand. His father, Sextus Varius Marcellus, was a high-ranking Roman official, but it was his mother's family, the Emesan priests, that would shape his destiny. From birth, the boy was marked by a destiny entwined with religion, ritual, and power far greater than the lands of his small city. Even as a child, Elagabalus displayed traits that set him apart from the other boys. While they ran through streets kicking stones and practicing the arts of war, he lingered in the temple, tracing the patterns of sacred symbols, learning the chants of the sun god, and exploring silken fabrics that hung in his mother's quarters. He loved music, color, and the scent of perfumes that were forbidden to boys of his age. He would often appear in the temple adorned with ribbons and flowers, much to the amusement, and sometimes horror, of the priests who attended the rituals. The boy's fascination with adornment was not mere whimsy. It was an expression of a self that demanded recognition, a self that could not be contained by the rigid expectations of Roman masculinity. Even before the crown, he experimented with garments, hairstyles, and gestures that reflected an identity apart from the world's gaze. These early signs of rebellion and self-expression would follow him to Rome, clashing with the empire's rigid codes and making him a figure both revered and reviled. The path to the throne began with a twist of fate, as it so often does in the stories of the young and powerful. In 218 AD, following the death of Emperor Caracalla and the chaotic rule of Macrinus, Julia Maesa, Elagabalus's grandmother, saw an opportunity. The boy, a priest of the sun god, was the perfect figurehead for her ambitions. At just 14 years old, Elagabalus was brought to Rome and crowned emperor, a boy of Syria elevated to the pinnacle of one of the greatest empires in history. The Roman Senate and populace were skeptical, even hostile. They whispered about the boy's foreign origins, his youth, and his eccentricities. They did not yet know of the silk and flowers, the makeup and jewelry, the private ceremonies where he shed the armor of tradition for the garments of his own choosing. In public, he bowed and smiled, recited speeches with surprising poise, and presented the image of a competent ruler. In private, he laughed at the absurdity of the expectation, dressing in silks, adorning himself with jewelry, and welcoming his closest companions into a court unlike any the Roman world had ever seen. From the desert to the empire, a boy emperor since. The boy who had only known the quiet temples of Emesa now ruled Rome, but the clash between personal identity and imperial expectation was only beginning. Elagabalus's reign was defined by paradox. He was a religious revolutionary, insisting on elevating the Syrian sun god above all Roman deities, replacing centuries of tradition with rituals that seemed alien to Roman sensibilities. He appointed priests, built altars, and celebrated ceremonies that combined the sacred and the theatrical, blurring the line between divine worship and personal expression. And then there was his personal life. The boy emperor refused the strict codes of masculinity demanded by Roman society. He preferred silk to armor, makeup to ceremonial robes, and companions who reflected his taste for beauty and grace. Ancient sources describe him dressing as a woman, seeking lovers among men, and performing ceremonies in which he assumed feminine roles, a shocking rebellion against the norms of the day. Some accounts, such as Cassius Dio, portray these behaviors with horror and scorn, describing them as evidence of moral decay. But modern historians suggest another perspective, a boy thrust into unimaginable power, exploring identity and self-expression in ways that terrified those who could not understand. Rome had never seen a king like him, and it never would again. Every act of self-expression became a political act, and every ceremony that celebrated who he was deepened the distance between him and the empire's traditions. Elagabalus transformed the imperial palace into a theater of excess. He filled rooms with exotic animals, fragrant oils, and endless feasts where courtiers were dressed in costumes, performing for the amusement of the emperor. Gold and silver adorned every surface, and jewels sparkled in every candlelit corner. But this court was not merely decadent, it was a reflection of Elagabalus himself. He surrounded himself with companions who shared his tastes, who could navigate the delicate dance of beauty, luxury, and secrecy. Some historians liken his court to a stage where every actor was expected to play their part, and the boy emperor directed with both whimsy and ruthless precision. Yet, the very extravagance that delighted him also fueled resentment. Senators whispered, priests murmured curses, and citizens mocked him openly. To be free in Rome was to be vulnerable, and the more he indulged his desires, the greater the danger that surrounded him. When freedom shines too brightly, it blinds those who fear it. The boy emperor's love for beauty and self-expression was inseparable from political risk, a risk that would eventually consume him. Rome was not built for indulgence or difference. Elagabalus's foreign origins, youth, and eccentricities made him a target. Senators conspired, generals murmured, and the Praetorian Guard watched with growing unease. The emperor's private life, once shielded by palace walls, became a source of public outrage. He tried to consolidate power while remaining true to himself, appointing allies, dismissing critics, and attempting to enforce the new religious order. But the lines between the sacred, the theatrical, and the political blurred, leaving him vulnerable. The more he expressed his identity, the more the city turned against him, and the more precarious his throne became. When private truth meets public fury, disaster is inevitable. The emperor's life, once a personal rebellion, had now become a political liability, a tension that would erupt in the ultimate tragedy. In 222 AD, after 4 years of rule, the conspiracies reached their climax. The Praetorian Guard, once protectors, turned on him. Elagabalus was assassinated alongside his mother, Julia Soaemias, ending a reign marked by defiance, beauty, and scandal. Rome restored order, erased memories, and condemned his name. His statues were torn down, his coins melted, and his personal life erased from official history. Yet the traces of who he truly was, the boy emperor who defied convention, who dressed as he pleased, who worshipped his sun god with passion and ceremony, could not be completely hidden. Even emperors bleed behind the crown. Death was the final curtain, but Elagabalus's life continued to haunt the stories of Rome and the imagination of history. In the cold, shadowed corridors of history, Elagabalus remains a figure shrouded in scandal, rebellion, and mystery. His name evokes images of a boy who dared to defy the very essence of Roman society, a ruler whose sense of self was so radical, so uncontainable, that it shook the foundations of an empire. Yet, beyond the salacious tales and exaggerated accounts, there lies a deeper question: what was it that truly threatened Rome? Was it the boy's excesses? Or was it the unflinching display of an identity that refused to bend? The tragedy of Elagabalus is not just in his extravagant behavior or his eventual demise. It lies in the soul-deep struggle of an individual trapped between the unbearable weight of societal expectation and the unrelenting pull of personal truth. He was an emperor who tried to carve out a space for himself in a world that demanded conformity, and in doing so, he became a symbol of a darker, more universal struggle, the struggle for acceptance, and the consequences of refusal. In a sense, Elagabalus was both a victim and a revolutionary. He sought the freedom to exist beyond the prescribed roles of masculinity, religion, and power. His reign, brief and chaotic as it was, remains a profound statement on the tensions between personal identity and political power, between the private and the public, between self-expression and the harsh judgment of the world. But what does this story teach us today? In an age where the struggle for identity, for authenticity, and for self-expression continues to shape our lives, Elagabalus's story serves as both a warning and a reminder. His refusal to conform and the chaos it unleashed is a stark reminder of the fragility of personal truth in a world that often demands conformity over authenticity. His downfall was not merely a matter of his eccentricities, but the empire's inability to tolerate that which it could not control. The tragedy of Elagabalus lies not in his defiance, but in the world's fear of it. Elagabalus's story reverberates through the ages, echoing in the lives of countless figures who, like him, dared to live outside the boundaries set by their time. Consider the story of Virginia Woolf, whose own struggles with gender and identity in the early 20th century mirrored, in some ways, the emperor's quest for self-expression. Woolf, too, felt confined by the rigid structures of her time, and her struggle to reconcile her inner world with society's expectations led to personal turmoil and, ultimately, tragic consequences. In the modern world, Elagabalus's defiance resonates in the ongoing struggles for LGBTQ+ rights and gender identity acceptance. The refusal to conform, once viewed as dangerous, immoral, or even pathological, is now an act of courage. Elagabalus's story might have ended in tragedy, but it mirrors the stories of many individuals today who are still fighting for the right to define themselves outside the boxes imposed by tradition, religion, and political power. Just as the Roman Empire could not withstand Elagabalus's identity, societies across the world today continue to grapple with the tension between individual expression and collective norms. In a world where people are still marginalized for their identities, Elagabalus's struggle speaks to the ongoing need for compassion, acceptance, and understanding. And perhaps, in a more personal sense, his story asks each of us, how much of ourselves are we willing to sacrifice to be seen and accepted by the world? How many of us, like Elagabalus, are caught between the pressure to conform and the desperate need to be authentic, no matter the cost? The echoes of Elagabalus's life remind us of the unchanging nature of this struggle, and of the cost of refusing to hide who we are, in the face of a world that often demands that we do.